Hello, welcome to 10 at 10. My name is Michael Ramage. I'm the director of the Cyber Education Research Center at Murray State University. 10 at 10 is brought to you through a partnership between Murray State University, Grow West, the Technology Council of West Kentucky, KY Innovation, and our local partners, Sprocket Innovation in Paducah and the Kentucky Innovation Station in Madisonville. A couple weeks ago, we started talking about 5 basic cybersecurity tips. These are the 5 tips that I share almost every time I speak with a group. If you ask me, what should you do that's going to improve your security the most, the biggest bang for your buck, it's these 5 areas. Some of these areas are pretty broad. Some of these are pretty specific. But it's these 5 areas that I think we can eliminate most of the low-hanging fruit, I'll say. A sophisticated attack is still going to get you. Some of those larger nation-state threats, there's those threat actors are still going to get you if they want to get you. But this is how we can eliminate the largest, what I call the low-hanging fruit, the easy, the low-cost investment on hacks. So let's talk through it. First of all, these were the 5 things. We talked about creating a security policy so that we know what we're measuring ourselves against last week. This week, we're going to talk about improving your passwords. We got a couple more things that we'll cover in the coming weeks, but I want to spend some time about improving your passwords. So first of all, let me share 4 primary tips. And honestly, this has changed over the last handful of years. There was a time when the guidance coming out from the cybersecurity experts, particularly the government, was saying to make your password, an 8-character password was enough if it was complex. Well, that's kind of changed of late. Now they want much longer passwords, 14, 16, 18, 20-character passwords, and the length is more important than the complexity. Now, there's mathematical formulas that can go into the explanation. Actually, I think I've done that on here before to talk about why that's important. But having a long password that is complex is really more valuable than having an 8-character password that's extremely complex. Number 2, do not reuse your passwords. A lot of what happens, so your unique password has to be created and stored in a hash function. A hash function takes some computational power. To do one hash function doesn't take much. To do a trillion hash functions, it does take some time. But what happens is the bad guys will store a hashing table. And if they break in and are able to compromise the password database for one website, then they'll take those hashes and they'll compare them to another website. So if you're reusing your passwords, then what that means in essence is that bad actor can get your password through another breach and use it to attack you in a different site. That's why you don't reuse passwords, which really brings us to the third point. How do you remember 100 passwords? In my case, I have well over 200 passwords. If I'm not going to reuse passwords, how do I remember all these passwords? I can't remember all these passwords. The answer is a password manager. Now, there's a number of different password managers out there, and I don't care which one you use. Some have, there's pros and cons. There's risk to all of them. Some are free, some cost. I will say you get what you pay for. But by and large, they're pretty inexpensive. This is one password that you see on the screen here. And it's what I use. There's a couple of specific reasons that I use it. I don't want to store my password vault on the cloud. I want to do it in my personal space. And anyway, but the point of a password vault is that you have to remember one password. One password. Once you remember that one password, then all of these other passwords are secure. Now, is there a risk that somebody could steal that one password? Sure, that there's a risk. But the risk of stealing your password and breaking into that file on your computer, if that's where it's stored, is a lot lower than somebody compromising a password database on one website and reusing it on another website, because that happens all the time. Every time there's a password breach, that's going to happen. That they're going to use those username and password combinations. So I highly recommend this. If you're not sure what a good, long, complex password is, actually, the password vault at most of them will even create one for you. So you have all that ability there. Highly recommend it. I can't encourage it enough. That way, if you are going to your bank account, you don't have to remember. It doesn't have to be an easy password. It can be a complex password. Go look in your password vault. In some password vaults will even integrate into your browser or into applications so that you don't have to go to another web or another application, find that password, and then go type it into your browser. It'll actually populate that all together. Some operating systems are doing that now. Some browsers are doing that now. I prefer a password vault that is separate, and I just maybe I'm overly cautious, but I don't know that I like the idea of my browser storing my passwords as well. But anyway, so there's a lot of options out there. I don't care which one you use. LastPass, 1Password, there's a bunch of them out there, but just use one. That is probably pretty important if you're going to have strong, complex passwords. Yeah, people write them down on paper. That's not great either. But doing it this way, you're storing it securely. Until you put that password into the password vault, that is encrypted, so they're not going to get to it. So again, that's a great way to do that. And the last thing I want to talk about today is two-factor authentication. So two-factor authentication means that you supply a second factor to prove that you are who you say you are. The whole idea behind putting in a password, you put in your name. My name's Michael Ramage. I got to prove that I'm Michael Ramage. What would I have that only Michael Ramage would have? Well, when I created my account, I had a password. So the assumption is that only Michael Ramage would know that password. Well, sometimes that assumption is wrong. We just talked about because a password, there was a breach at a website and the password database got breached. So it's possible that somebody in another country even could steal my password. Maybe they call, maybe they trick me into telling them on the phone what my password is. So there's a threat of somebody stealing your password. Here's the other part. The idea is that, okay, they may steal my password, but I've got to prove that I have a device. So maybe I use my cell phone as my second factor. I have my cell phone. The odds of somebody stealing my password and my cell phone are much lower. Now, is there a threat from my neighbor? Sure. Is there a threat from the person in the office next to you? Sure. But for most companies, the larger threat is not the insider a threat, although we'll talk about that in a few weeks. There is a threat there. The larger threat is the organized crime that is not in this country. So how do you stop them? Having that second factor works. Now, there's the guidance on two-factor authentication has changed a little bit over the last year or two. Used to, a text message was more than sufficient for your second factor. You've probably even heard me talk about that. Now, is that better than nothing? Yeah, probably. But people can fake your information and get the website that or the application you're trying to authenticate through to send them that text message instead of you. So what security experts are recommending now is that you don't use your text message, that you use an application. So Google has an authenticator app. Duo is something that we use at Murray State. So you authenticate through the application with your credentials. Then it'll send that application a message and you can authenticate, yes, that's me. It's really me. Two-factor authentication is cheap, in some ways even free. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Gmail, if you're on Twitter, your bank probably has two-factor authentication for free. All these ways of doing two-factor authentication are free. And they're almost a must-have now for your organization. Matter of fact, there was a story this week up in Illinois about a school district that they're looking at cyber insurance. Their cyber insurance increased threefold. But one of the things the insurance company said is that we will not provide you full coverage until you implement two-factor authentication in the school district. So it's not just a nice to have item now, it's a must have. And I highly recommend that you take the time for your organization and for you as an individual to use two-factor authentication in every place that you possibly can. If two-factor authentication is an option, use it. And let me say that it's not asking you, most applications don't ask you to authenticate with two-factor authentication every single time you log in. On Gmail, it does it every time there's a new device that it doesn't recognize, or you're from a new network that it doesn't recognize, or once a month or so. It's not every day. It's not every time you log in. It's really not that inconvenient. It's something that you should do, and I hope that you take that under consideration and implement it if you haven't already. Again, two-factor authentication, password vault, complex passwords. Those are three things that probably can help you secure your network, probably more than anything else that we're going to talk about. Next week, we're going to talk about user awareness training, which is pretty important as well. But for now, I want to say thank you for your time today. I hope you found this interesting. If you have questions about any of these items or how to do it or where to find it, let me know. Send me a message and I will be happy to direct you to resources that can help you implement it in your organization. Again, thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you next week on 10 at 10. Thank you.